Hey, if you've ever felt like bodybuilding or heavy strength training has left you feeling stiff and achy, then today I'm gonna provide you with a new perspective. Big compound lifts are fantastic for building muscle, strength, and boosting your metabolism. But by making this one adjustment, you can ensure that your joints are gonna stay healthy and resilient for many years to come while getting the benefits of heavy strength training. All right, for decades, I have been strength training and at times lifting with great intensity and not paying attention to what I'm gonna tell you today. In the year 2017, my perspective shifted where I realized that I needed to take a more 360-degree approach to training my joints so that they could stay resilient and healthy while doing big compound lifts like leg presses, back squats, cleans, deadlifts, you name it. And over the years, I have learned that the hips are really the centerpiece to building great low back health and core strength. Now, training your hips in 360 degrees is not super common in most strength training programs. So I'm gonna show you today how we use the multi-hip and glute machine to get that done. And I'm gonna provide you with some options if you don't have one of these machines to do it with minimal equipment. Now, it's pretty common in bodybuilding programs or strength training programs to see an exercise like the deadlift. When we break down big movements like that, we can actually look at the hip and see what the function is inside that movement pattern, and it is hip extension. Now, the hip moves in 360 degrees, but the big patterns that we need to focus on are hip flexion, hip extension, hip adduction, and hip abduction. And that's really what this machine is all about. So what I'm gonna do today is I'm gonna show you a couple big compound exercises and a 360-degree approach to hip training that can help complement those big compound lifts in your program. The first is the sumo deadlift. The sumo deadlift places your hips in a very wide position, and it really trains the adductors. There's a bringing of the knees towards the midline when you perform a sumo deadlift, and that is adduction of the hip. So if you're gonna be doing sumo deadlifts or a movement like that in your training, it's good to complement that with some direct adductor work. If you have access to a multi-hip machine like this, you're gonna place the pad far to the left, you're gonna get the pad on the inside of your leg, and you're gonna bring it from outside to in. The idea is that you wanna get maximal stretch at the top and cross the midline at the bottom. At the end of my training, I may do sets of 15 to 20, slightly higher rep, but you can absolutely train this heavy in the 10 to 12 rep range and get great isolation in one adductor, working on that adduction of the hip. That's one of the 4 major movement patterns that we're gonna be focusing on. Now, something like a leg press or a back squat, this is a big hip extension exercise. Hip extension is common in most of the lower body exercises that you do, and doing single leg hip extension or glute focused work on the multi-hip is a great way to balance your training that you're doing on both legs with the big compound lifts and getting some unilateral work in as well. Hip extension is gonna mean bringing your knee up, placing the pad underneath it, and starting high and finishing low with your heel behind you and your leg straight. When I'm here, I'm 100% contracted in my glute. When I come up here, I'm getting 100% stretch in the glute. So stretch, extend, hip extension. Now we're gonna focus on movements that you're doing in your program that are glute specific. Think hip thrust, think Bulgarian split squats, think lunges. These train your glutes, everyone gets sore here. But there's a smaller group of muscles up at the top of the glute that really work on something called abduction. Abduction, moving away from the midline. There's plenty of ways to train this. You can use cables. I'm gonna show you a bodyweight variation later. But when I'm working on the multi-hip, I make sure that my leg comes across my body. I place the pad right at my knee joint, and I'm making sure to finish high and to the side. So I'm crossing the midline to get maximal stretch in that upper glute area. And then at this point, it's maximal contraction. I can feel it right here, and doing 15 to 20 reps for 2 to 3 sets at the end of your glute training can be a great way to supplement and make sure your hip is getting healthy and resilient in all these directions. All right, last but not least is the hip flexors. Now, there's plenty of exercises that we do to train hip flexion, and a lot of them are core related. However, when people squat and you're doing things like front squats or even back squats, the hip flexors play a big role in stability. And if you're training those exercises a lot, they can get very stiff and dysfunctional. So doing direct hip flexor work on this multi-hip machine is a great way to counterbalance that. If you want to work hip flexion on this machine, then the pad has to be back and you have to be able to have tension when you're in hip extension. This is going to stretch the hip flexors, and as I drive up to my contracted hip flexor position, I'm getting great contraction and work through a full range on each side. Again, 15 to 20 reps on the multi-hip at the end of a heavy squat session can really do wonders for lengthening and strengthening your hip flexors so you feel more support and stability at the bottom of your squats. So now that we've covered the 4 ways that we can train the hip, the 4 movement patterns, that's all in good if you've got a multi-hip and glute machine like this one from French Fitness, their Tahoe series. But if you don't, then let me show you how we can do this with a bench and a single dumbbell to anchor your foot down. All right, since I just showed you hip flexion on the multi-hip machine, I'm gonna show you how to do single leg hip flexion right here with a bench and my foot anchored under a heavy dumbbell. So this is basically going to be a one-legged sit-up, but because I'm not arching and curling my spine too much, all that's pulling me up in this exercise is my hip flexor. So keep your trunk stiff and locked, stretch over the top, and you'll feel all these muscles that cross the hip joint pulling you back up into a seated position. All right, next up is single leg hip extension. Put your heel up on a bench. You're only gonna be using one leg at a time. Hands out to the side and bridge your hips up as high as you can go. Come down, lightly tap, and back up. All right, next up for those adductors where you're bringing your leg into the middle of your body on the machine, we can do a Copenhagen raise. And you're gonna take the top leg, you're gonna anchor your ankle onto the top of the bench, and then it's raising your hips as high as you can, lightly tapping and back up. Now this is a pretty advanced exercise, and if that feels too difficult for you, the scaled down version of it would be to put your knee and your lower leg on the bench, perform them with a shortened lever so that it's not as much effort. And last but not least, that abduction, working that high glute that's gonna complement your glute specific training. This one is gonna be a hip dip. So the bottom leg is on the bench. I'm lifting this up to make it harder. You can place it right on top to make it easier, and you lower your hip down, touch the ground, and up as high as you can. So I tap, drive my ankle into the bench, create as much distance between the floor and my hip as possible for every rep. And just like the rep scheme I gave you on the multi-hip machine, you can do 15 to 20 reps for 2 to 3 sets. At the end of your training, you do not need to do all 4 of these exercises in every session. Pick one, add it to your lower body leg day training. It's gonna help your hips feel way better. Now there's one more concept that I wanna talk about. This one's a little bit nuanced, but what is the difference between doing it in this fashion versus on the multi-hip machine? All of the bench variations that I showed you had my leg fixed on the ground and my body moving. That is called a closed chain exercise. Closed chain exercises are where the foot or whatever implement you're holding onto is fixed and your body weight is moving through space. The multi-hip and glute is very unique in that it allows you to train all of these different hip directions with an open chain exercise. Now my body is fixed and my limb is moving through space. It's a subtle difference, but a meaningful and impactful one. So if you have the option to do both in your training, it's great. It gives you more variance in the stimulus to your hip. You might find that you feel better on these and that this challenges you more or vice versa, but they both belong in your training. Go out there, train those hips in all directions, keep your body feeling strong, safe, stable, and resilient for a long time to come. And if you like this machine and you want to grab one, click the link below. You can get one from French Fitness. This is the Tahoe series multi-hip and glute machine.